Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Auxiliary Markings Club's second Tuesday series. We do one of these meetings every week or every month on the second Tuesday, almost exclusively, except when scheduling or someone from Europe requires us to do it at a more humane hour for them. So you can generally count on us to be here on the second Tuesday of every month and at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, or Daylight Time in this case. I'm Greg Redner. I have the great privilege to serve as the president of this wonderful club. And just a few commercials before we begin. We like to say that we think the Auxiliary Markings Club is the best value you can get for what you get in return. And if you're not a member, why aren't you a member? We have a wonderful journal which is called Auxiliary Markings. It's published 4 times a year. We have a great website which is maintained by Doug Quine and is very up to date. You can find that at postal-markings.org. And a digital membership costs you just $15. So if you're not a member, we invite you to go to our website and have a look and see whether you might be interested in becoming one. We also have a YouTube page, which you can find at Auxiliary Markings Club, and a Facebook page, also at Auxiliary Markings Club. The Facebook page is updated almost every day with an interesting marking from somewhere in the world. And the YouTube channel contains the back catalog of all of our former Auxiliary Markings Club second Tuesday meetings. One of the things that we're really excited about is we are going to have our first club virtual exhibition coming this fall. It's going to be a one-frame exhibit, and it'll be sometime in late October. We'll have national judges judging it, and there'll be a judges' feedback session. Your exhibit doesn't need to deal exclusively with auxiliary markings, but they should play an important part in telling your story. So we hope that you will give some thought to thinking about entering an exhibit in that. I'm really pleased tonight to welcome David Handelman as our presenter. I first heard David do this presentation, or a form of it, for the British Empire Study Group. And I was so impressed with the quality of the information that he imparted in his scholarship that I thought we have to get him on our second Tuesday series. And I was delighted to find out that he was Canadian after I got in touch. So David Handelman grew up in Toronto and began collecting stamps around age 10, following this with Canadian postal history by the age of 17. David soon narrowed his collecting focus down to stampless, early stamped, and registration covers. In the mid-1990s, he began collecting worldwide AR and return receipt requested covers, and this has remained his passion to this day. David attended the University of Toronto and received a Bachelor of Science, and then went to McGill University, where he received a Master of Science and a PhD, studying mathematics. He was a postdoctoral fellow at both Justus Liebig University in Gießen and at the University of Utah. Following this, David took up a position at the University of Ottawa, where he remained from 1977 until his retirement. He remains affiliated to the University of Ottawa as a professor emeritus. David is also a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. So David's going to be talking to us tonight about AR and RRR markings on U.S. mail. And he'll discuss the way the post office dealt with these during the period 1860 to circa 1950. So David, we look forward to your presentation, and take it away.
Thank you very much. So as you may have guessed, this talk concerns return receipt. So to begin with, return receipt is a postal service. A form or card is sent with a registered letter. This form or card is signed by the recipient, and that form is returned to the original sender, and that provides evidence of delivery. In many places, such as Canada, UK, it is used by lawyers particularly. In the US, it was actually quite widely used. And there was usually a fee, but we'll see the US dealt with it in a particularly idiosyncratic way. Now, the official UPU name for this service is avis de réception, and there are other terms in use aside from return receipt: acknowledgement of receipt, advice of delivery, acknowledgement due, and a horde of others. The first postal service to offer AR, which is what we'll call it in general, but we'll specialize in a little, was Austrian Empire in 1779. And as a result, a few of the German states offered it from the early 19th century onward, and it sort of spread to Europe throughout to about the 1850s or so. For
Did
example,
we just
finally
lose
France
voice?
adopted in 1859, the US in 1863. And it's very
David,
convenient, particularly
David,
for the US. Sorry?
David, it's possible we may have lost your voice. Can you just make sure your audio is, that your microphone is working? Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Uh,
I can hear you, but some others couldn't. You're fine now. Okay, go ahead.
okay. But did you hear my introduction?
Yeah, we did. It was just the last couple of sentences that we may have lost, so you might want to
Ah,
stay there. Okay.
okay. I have no explanation. I didn't do anything. Okay. So the definition of return receipt, did you hear that?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So a form is sent with a registered letter. It's signed by the recipient of the registered letter, and then the form is returned to the original sender, and that provides evidence of delivery. The official UPU name is avis de réception, and there are other terms in English in addition to return receipt. The Postal Service AR, has been available uh, since 1779 in Austria. A few German states followed suit in the early 19th century, and it spread to Europe. Uh, Practically every major European country by the 1870s. Now, for the US, it's convenient to divide it into two: the domestic AR service, which will be known as RRR, which stands for Return Receipt Requested, a formula used to request return receipt, and international AR from the US or to the US as well, and that'll simply be known as AR. So let's start with domestic AR in the US. Late 1863, the US introduced RRR as a compulsory service on domestic registered mail. This sounds like a bargain, except that the registration fee was already considerably higher than other countries' registration fee. And here's an example of an early form from 1864. This would have accompanied a registered letter, in this case, registration number 11. It was mailed October 25th, 1864 at Burlington something. I'm not really sure what the second. It's near Philadelphia. Oh no, sorry, it's Burlington, Iowa. And it was addressed to someone, well, a company actually, and you can see it's signed for. And this the faint cancel reads Como, Iowa. So this would have been put in a covering envelope and returned to the original sender, this David River, whatever it is. Uh, and you can distinguish this from registration receipts simply by the presence of the word return. So
That's
a
actually
registration
Quincy.
receipt, sorry,
That's actually Quincy, Iowa.
is it?
The, yeah, Quincy. I'm
Uh, Here?
no, that's Burlington, Iowa.
Oh,
Down to the
Quincy.
Quincy,
Yeah.
Iowa.
Oh, maybe you're right. Yeah, yeah. Uh, yes, you're right. But the postmark is Como, Iowa. Uh, maybe Quincy didn't have a post office. Anyway, um, this was so this is an early example and has return in it. An ordinary registration receipt would not have had return. And here's a slightly later one, 1869. This was specially printed for the New York post office. And again, it's a registered letter and there's a registration number, and it was properly signed by the recipient at Herrick Center. And it would have been put in a covering envelope, which we show in the next. Here's a pair, which is very difficult to get at this period. The form and the covering envelope that contained it to return it to the sender. So what we have here is another one of these things from 1876 for a registered letter from Clear Creek, New York State to Girard, Pennsylvania. It's properly signed, postmarked at Girard, and then it was returned to the office of origin, Clear Creek, New York. They would arrange to have the original sender get it. Maybe he just showed up at the post office. Maybe they mailed it in a separate covering envelope. There are various methods. They did this official stamp had only been introduced 3 years earlier, so before that there were no stamps on the covering envelopes. Now, occasionally we can find the registered cover with the form. In this case, it was attached. It is, well, still is attached by glue. And you can check, here's the registered letter, tell by the registration marks and so on, it's within New York State. And you can tell registration number 740, and that's also what appears in the registration number on the registered return letter receipt. And you can see the postmark is virtually identical. So this was for a registered letter within the state, and you see it's not signed. Now that's because, well, there are two possibilities for when you have the cover or the cover that was sent with, in this case, the registered letter and the form. One possibility is that the registered letter was returned to sender, and the form would accompany it back, and it wouldn't be signed because it was never delivered. The alternative, now unfortunately, there's no indication that this was returned to sender. There's no markings whatsoever to indicate that. So there's an alternative, was simply that the registered letter was delivered with the return receipt attached, and they just neglected to get it signed, and they didn't pull it off. They just kept it with it. And this is somewhat unusual because the literature mostly says registered letters were sent separately from the forms, or the forms were sent separately. They were sent at the same mailing in a separate cover, covering envelope, and with the registered letter. So there are two separate deliveries, but here it was attached. And in fact, that's what we see. It's almost always attached in the later period. Okay. Now, the forms were a little awkward. For one thing, they required covering envelopes to return them. So in mid-79, along with a lot of other introductions, changes in stationery in the US, the forms, which were thin sheets, were replaced by cards. They looked like postcards. They had the same thickness. And these didn't require a covering envelope. And moreover, they didn't have to be returned to the office of origin. They could actually be returned directly to the sender without going through the middleman. So here is a relatively early example, October 1879, for a registered letter from Wyoming to Denver, a place in Wyoming. And you can see it says register your return receipt, and it's for registered number, so on. You also see that there's a distinction between letter and parcel, and the parcel is struck through. In fact, is almost all the cards we see, of which there are thousands and thousands on eBay regularly, have the letter left. In other words, the parcel is struck through. So it's very unusual to actually find something which is a registered parcel. And they stopped being eligible for registration early in the 20th century anyway. And you can see this was on the back. Well, I've shown the reverse, which is actually the front, because it contains the address where this was to be sent in Wyoming, the original address of the original or the origin of the registered letter, and it was properly signed here. And these could be used alongside the forms. So they didn't withdraw the forms, they continued to be used. Now, in 1910, from being compulsory unregistered mail, it became a free option. But you had to indicate that you wanted it, and you had to fill in a card, in fact, the return receipt card, as much as you could when you sent it off. So suddenly you get hand stamps. Now, in fact, we'll see in the international case, the hand stamps were available earlier. And the recommended formula to request return receipt was return receipt demanded. But you have all sorts of variants, and there are 5 or 6. So here's an unusual one, receipt desired. This also has the unusual feature. It has an experimental label for Elizabeth, New Jersey. And this is August 1910, fairly early. And you see that there's no extra postage required for the AR fee. This was just 10 and 2, the registration plus the domestic rate. And here's another one, also August 1910, and with this really tiny return receipt demanded. Cancel. It's the smallest I'd ever seen. And again, there wasn't any fee for this service. Now, in 1913, the mail could be insured, some mail, third class parcel post, and also you couldn't register them anymore. So in that case, you could send it with insurance, and you could also send AR or a return receipt on it. Send it with return receipt. So it was a free option here too. Here's a special tag for an insured parcel, but there are other artifacts of this as well. So it's the stamp is return receipt. The hand stamp is return receipt demanded, uh, and you can see there's a 5 cent, which is the minimal insurance rate at the time. It would also have been charged the parcel post rate, but this was a tag that was attached to the parcel by the U.S. mail. There are sometimes other tags which were attached by the sender with the address and so on, and they would have stamps to pay all the fees. So this is August 1913. Now, in 1925, there were 2 sets of rate changes, and finally, return receipt became chargeable. It became 3 cents. Now, where did the 3 cents get paid? Well, for the U.S., it got paid on the cover. It could have been paid on the card, as many countries required it there. But the U.S. was on the cover, and here's an example where the sender in Ellsworth, Maine, sending a letter to Winchendon, Massachusetts, has separated out the return receipt fee, the 3 cent fee. 15 cents pays the registration fee, 2 cents domestic rate, and he's requested it, but there's no other marking. So this is requested by the sender, TypeScript, and that was fine. In this particular case, it was unclaimed and returned to sender. You see fairly often the stamp paying the RRR fee is separated from the others, but there is no requirement for that. Now, there's an extra service available on top of return receipt, so it required return receipt as a prerequisite. It wasn't charged until 1931. It's called addressee only or personal delivery or restricted delivery. And it meant the person who signed for the registered letter and signed the card must be the addressee. You couldn't have an agent or somebody living in the household or someone in the office. It had to be the addressee. And there's documentation for this from an 1891 postal laws and regulations, but there are earlier examples known than 1891. And here's a really early one, 1884, with deliver personally. So the requirement is that the addressee only could sign it, and so one of the terms for this is addressee only. And in this case, The person wasn't found, and it was returned to sender. Now, here is an early hand stamp for restricted delivery. So it's personal receipt required. If we want to refer, if we thought it was return receipt, well, in this period, return receipt was automatic. This is 1905, before the 1910 change to to a free option. So personal receipt refers to restricted delivery. And again, it was returned. In fact, a great many of these are returned to sender. Now, restricted delivery became chargeable in 1934, and of course, it still required return receipt as well. So if you wanted to get restricted delivery, in other words, restrict the signer of the relevant documents, you had to pay the RRR fee. It had to be sent with return receipt as well. So this is September 34. You can see the hand stamp, not very clear, delivered to addressee only. And for a change, this wasn't returned to sender. And you can also see it's starting to get a little expensive because the registration fee was 15, return receipt was 3. There's another 3 for domestic rate, and then there was 10 cents for the restricted delivery, which is covered by the stamp. So 31 cents in this period was fairly expensive. Now, here's an interesting one. In this case, the sender wrote a little essay on the left side of the envelope, which I've shown upright, and I transcribed it here. It's a letter. Well, the first line says, deliver only to the addressee, and that means restricted delivery. And it's to the governor of the state of Georgia. This was from Memphis, a different state. So, and that he mentions return receipt, which at this time he had to have done. This was 1911, so it's after return receipt became a free option. And then he goes on, deliver himself. When you see himself, it almost certainly means, or in this context, it means addressee only or personal delivery again. And then there's some other stuff which is sort of just weird. Well, the sender was A.J. Olander, and his wife, his estranged wife, was one of the 3 victims of the 1909 Savannah Axe murders. And there was a trial of J.C. Hunter, and soon after, well, within 6 months, he was convicted, sentenced to death, and it's likely that, or it's possible that this seemingly urgent letter to the governor, well, it may have been a request to commute the death sentence. I mean, I don't have the letter, unfortunately, but why else would you write a letter like this with this endorsement on it? In fact, it's almost certain that Hunter was not guilty, and the death sentence was commuted, and he was pardoned 12 years later. I mean, who pardons a triple murderer unless you're pretty convinced that he didn't do it? Another feature of this is that it was refused. This was sent to the governor, who would have had, of course, flunkies to sign registration letters to his office and so on. But this was because it had personal delivery request. It could only be signed by him, the governor, and it was refused. Well, it's possible, it's likely, in fact, but not absolutely certain that was the reason it was refused. Didn't want the governor didn't want to sign it personally, but we can't really know for sure. And it was a result of the personal delivery request. But here's the next one, is one in which we're reasonably certain that it was because of it was refused because of the personal delivery restriction, because it says so. This messy hand stamp on the left in purple, well, I tried enlarging it, and you can sort of make out some things, but after considerable examination, I decided that it read, refused on account of personal delivery restriction. So this was a 1930 letter to Henry Ford, and again, he would have had lackeys to take care of all the registered mail to his office. But because of the delivered addressee only, the personal delivery restriction, uh, it was refused. You know, there was no, it would have he didn't want to sign it, or some staff member refused it because he didn't want to bother or something. In any event, this happened, and I have a couple more examples of those. Now, there's another very expensive service available if you sent it with return receipt, showing address where delivered. Now, I'm not really sure what this is supposed to mean, but I suspect it means on the card, the clerk or the was supposed to put the address where it was signed. So you could send it to someone, but it might get forwarded, and you wanted to make sure you knew the forwarding address, and that would appear on the card. And this was 1931. It was 20 cents, and you also required the return receipt fee. So here's an example, and you can see this two-piece hand stamp. It's a single hand stamp because there are two examples of it. Return receipt requested, showing address where delivered, and it was 20 cents, and the postage just matches. This is 36. Let's see, what was it, 1838? Yeah, 38, 40 cents. So it's getting a bit high for 1931. And you could combine the two extra services, restricted delivery and showing address on the same cover. So they both required return receipt as a prerequisite. In this case, the letter writer just put everything in typescript, and then the clerk hand stamped it correspondingly. So there's restricted delivery, that's addressee only, and the same type of marking that we saw before, combined return receipt and showing address where delivered. And this was 51 cents for a single letter in 1943. That seems nothing special about it other than these features. It didn't go by airmail or anything. Okay. It could also happen that registered letters were postage due. Usually this doesn't happen, but it happened when it occurred. It was likely because somebody just took a letter, threw it in the mailbox, but had marked it registered. In this case, the sender marked it registered, return receipt, showing address where delivered, which is that's the 20-cent service. And either because it was damaged and then repaired, and they would have seen what was interested in it, and they would have registered it, or simply because somebody observed the registered mail inscription, and you can see that removed from the ordinary mail and registered hand stamp. So they applied. He wanted these services, so you give it to him, and so it was charged 39 cents single deficiency, which was normal at the time. Unregistered mail deficiency was usually single. So it's charged 15 cents for registration, 3 cents for return receipt, 20 cents for showing address. And he had only used a 2-cent stationery when the domestic rate was 3 cents. So there was a 1-cent top up to pay the domestic rate. And the postage due stamps are applied on reverse. Now there's an additional service called after the fact. It's also known as subsequent return receipt. After 1910, if you didn't initially send the item with return receipt service, you can send an after the fact return receipt card asking that the recipient sign it. And if this recipient didn't want to sign it, then it was enough that the postal clerk who had delivered delivered the registered letter sign it. The fee was typically higher. Here we see a 5-cent stamp. The return receipt fee was 3 cents. And this is the first time we see an actual stamp on the return receipt card. because in the other all normally the return receipt is paid on the cover, but the cover having flown the coop, there was no other place to put it except on the card. And so there's a 5 cent after the fact return receipt service. And we can also check from the dates what's going on. So this was for a registered letter within Sacramento. Uh, we know the date of delivery from looking at the reverse. The registered letter was delivered on July 1st. And for some reason, they put that date in the postmark. This card was signed 8/8/35. So it's August 8th, more than 5 weeks later. So the card must have been prepared quite a bit later, maybe a few days earlier than that, because everything is just within Sacramento, so it wouldn't take much time to go. But there's no indication of the actual date the card was prepared. But we're sure that it's after the fact, simply because of the presence of the stamp and the fee. Another possibility is that return receipt cards could be returned by air. If you sent a registered letter with return receipt by airmail, then you could you could also pay to get the card returned by air. In this case also, you put the airmail fee on the stamp on the cover, on the card rather. So you would have already paid the airmail fee on the cover for it to go by air to the destination, and this was from the destination to the original sender. And these are very difficult to find, and this is the earliest one I've seen. And you can sort of see, I'll take anything. I mean, it really is it's a lot worse than it looks. I mean, the scan makes it look almost half decent, but it's really terrible condition. Anyway, it's for returning from Fairbanks to St. Paul. No, sorry, returning to Fairbanks from St. Paul. Now we move to international AR, and things are different. The first evidence we have for international AR from the US is an 1868 treaty with the North German Union, later extended to Germany, which was formed in 1871. It was a free option from the US right from the beginning, and it only required the endorsement return receipt demanded, which is where the use of it on domestic mail came from. So it was only in 1910 that return receipt demanded, or some form of it was required on domestic letters sent with RR. But there are very few covers from this period up to the formation of the GPU. So it's, in other words, covered by the treaty. Here's an example. And if you look very closely in the upper left, you'll see the notation return receipt requested. And that was probably written by the clerk because it matches the handwriting, but not the handwriting of the sender. And below that, it says Retour Arschein verlangt. And now Arschein is an abbreviation of Rückschein, which was one of the standard terms in German for return receipt. There was another standard term, Retourrecepisse, used in Austria, so they sort of combined them. And this became just a non-standard AR term in German. Right, yes, and this was 1871. I think there are 4 or 5 USAR covers from this period. Now, part of the treaty required bilingual German-English AR forms. So in the period 68 to 75, there are no US examples known of the AR forms. So these are the forms that were returned to sender, signed by the recipient. As consolation, there are a few examples, 4 or 5, of this uh, of the German form covered under the treaty. So this was for a registered letter from Cannstatt, now in part of Stuttgart, to Altona, Pennsylvania, in 1874. And you can see it is sort of bilingual. Well, the German is clear, but there is some English. It's not perfect English. Um, in fact, it's rather poor English. But you can see it was signed in Altona, and this would have been put in a covering envelope, just as the U.S. domestic forms were at about the same time, in fact. Now we go to mid-1875. The GPU was formed, the General Postal Union, and that morphed into the UPU a little later. So when the GPU was formed, members were required to offer AR service among themselves, among the initial signatories. And in 1879, this was extended to all members of the UPU as they joined. And again, early A covers and forms are rare until the 1890s. So here's an 1885 example. The proper form They use the proper formula. Return receipt demanded at the extreme left. This was mailed from Chicago, Chicago station. The EW, cancel, is a known postmark of that station, uh, to Germany. And there's still no fee. It's still a free option. Now here's a form from the same period. When the GPU was formed, the return receipts now had to include French. Well, formerly they had included German because of the treaty. So now they're trilingual. The U.S. used trilingual forms, unlike almost any other jurisdiction, for a period. And this is the earliest form, a U.S. return receipt or AR form I'm aware of. That is for international mail, and this is for uh, a registered letter from New York to Leipzig. And the instructions included sending it in a covering envelope. Some countries' forms could be sent as uh, folded letter sheets, like they did in the 1840s before envelopes were in common use, but not the U.S. They required covering envelopes to do this. And this is from the collection of Les Lamphir. And here's covering envelope that contained an AR form, and that's what it says. It's a avis de réception en retour, so it says return notice of reception. So in other words, the form is being returned in this. And so this would have been, at this time, well, it's addressed to Germany, and that's where the original registered letter came from. It would have attached to it would have been an AR form. It would have been signed at the destination in the States. Now, we can't be sure what the destination was because very often they just prepared everything. They prepared the covering envelope at the port of exit, New York in this case. But you can see that it was the post office of the Imperial something something company. Yeah, the Imperial Railroad, post office number 6. And again, this is the earliest U.S. covering envelope for international mail, AR covering envelope. And this is also from the collection of Les Lamphir. Now, there's a significant change in 1892. The UPU Treaty of Vienna came into effect, and among its numerous conditions or changes, uh, it required AR equivalent to be stamped or endorsed on the cover. Um, Previously, or in the one cover we saw from the US, it was simply return receipt demanded, and that was sufficient. But from 1892, you had to put AR or vie de réception or something like that on it. But a more significant change was that the form now be prepared in the country of destination. And so we take a look at this. Here's an 1893 cover, so it would have been covered by the Treaty of Vienna. It was mailed from Chicago. Return receipt demanded, and some non-standard German, Rückschein Quittung verlangt, indicating AR. And at New York, as it was supposed to, New York was the port of exit, they applied the AR hand stamp. The rule was if it wasn't marked AR, if it was marked return receipt demanded, if it was going with AR and it wasn't marked AR or vie de réception, it was supposed to be this marking was supposed to be applied at the port of exit in this case, New York. And I know this is from New York because of other examples. There's also this blue Rückschein, which is the standard term in German, and this was applied on the German sea post mail on letters with AR, incoming and later on outgoing too, and they had a series of hand stamps to later on, like starting the next year. And here is now the difference in treatment. Here's a pair consisting of a USAR form. You can see it's still trilingual. This is 1892, after the Treaty of Vienna came into effect, and the covering envelope that was used to return it to the sender. So this was for a registered letter from Germany to Philadelphia. Because of the rules of the Treaty of Vienna, the form was prepared probably in New York, sent along with a registered cover to Philadelphia, where it was signed, and then sent back in some form of penalty envelope, probably. And then in New York, it was put in this special avis de réception en retour, the AR covering envelope. This was printed for this particular one was printed for the New York office, and sent off to the sender in Germany. Another feature, if you look really carefully at this image, you'll see that the accent on the E in réception is incorrect. It's a grave going the wrong direction. This was corrected on later printings. Now, for registered letters from the US in the Vienna period, the forms were necessarily prepared in the destination country. So in this case, it's an 1897 letter from Dayton, of which there's a considerable AR correspondence, to Paris. In Paris, a French AR form was prepared. It was signed for, which was unfortunately covered by the envelope, and it was put in this French covering envelope, which actually covered more than just a vie de réception AR forms. There's some other uses for it as well, but it's explicitly written that's one of the uses. And one of the reasons we know that these belong together is that this one's inscribed 181, that's the form, and so is the covering envelope. The dates all match. And in fact, I think they're identical. And there's also a 182, and I'm pretty sure I have that around, but a cursory search didn't find it. So I probably have form 182, but as I recall, it looks almost identical. So it actually contained two AR forms. Now, the procedure to prepare the AR form in the destination country was awkward, so it was switched back with the Treaty of Washington in 1899. So once again, the forms were prepared at the Office of Origin and you almost always attach the registered item. And there would be a foreign AR covering envelope to return the form to the office of origin. So here we have an example to illustrate that. This is for a registered letter from Germany to Boston. It was accompanied by the German, actually, Württemberg, which ran a separate postal service, AR form. It was signed in Boston and put in this U.S. AR covering envelope to return it to Germany. And you could see everything was done at Boston. And you can also see this is a somewhat different official form because the other one we saw was post office at New York. This was just left blank. So this is presumably the generic version of this penalty envelope. And you also see that it was returned itself by registered mail, as had all the other covering envelopes that we've seen. Now, in the post-Vienna, that's Washington and on, there was still a rule about applying hand stamp AR or equivalent. Well, here's an example. I'm not sure. I think this was private. This is a private postmark applied by the sender. That it's all one hand stamp. The first line or the second line, well, the first two words of it are the standard term in Hungarian for for AR. I don't know what the third term means, and I've never seen it on an official Hungarian AR anything. The third line is sort of a mishmash of two terms, a vida reception, but without the accent D, though that's okay. But then they misspelled demande, and they put the accent in the wrong character, and they mixed up the two forms, a vida reception and return receipt demanded. But in any effect, that was good enough. And this was mailed from Perth Amboy, but it went via New York. Now here's one from Boston to the Italian post office in Constantinople, 1909. So remember, the 1910 date doesn't have any significance for international AR from the US. If you wanted AR, you had to market AR. They used the old term, return receipt demanded, which had been in use prior to 1892. And it was from Boston, and Boston was the port of exit. So they should have marked it AR, but there's no evidence of that. Of course, it's cut off a little too. And you could see it just says demanded in manuscript here, but it probably said return receipt demanded or receipt demanded. Even so, I don't think it was actually applied because Boston was much less used as a port of exit. And you can also see the official sealed stamps. Okay. And here's a rather distinctive AR hand stamp. This is New York. So this was a registered letter to UK, mailed from Springfield, Massachusetts. The sender had only marked return or receipt requested, which was adequate as far as it went. At New York, the port of exit, they were supposed to mark it AR, and they did. And in UK, it bounced around a while, and finally it was returned to sender. So this is the big purple rectangular thing is a British thing, undelivered for reasons stated, and so on. Okay, and it also used the registered letter stamp. Now, in 1921-22, more like late 22, the AR forms were replaced by cards, although the forms could still be used. Now, these cards are the same shape and size as the domestic ones, the RRR cards, but they had to have French. So these are bilingual French-English, and they're quite distinctive. Also, when AR was charged from 1925 on. The stamps paying the AR fee were applied on the cover, not on the card. And the first example you see has a pair of Polish registration stamps on it, Polish stamps on it. This is April 1923, a relatively early card to Poland. The Polish clerk was probably used to Polish AR cards having the AR fee paid on it and not the cover. So every country could do what it liked. You could put the AR fee on the cover or on the former card. And Poland just normally put it on the card, so he thought there should be stamps there. And so he put the equivalent, 1,000 marks. This was an inflation period. He put the AR fee, the Polish AR fee there, I guess, just to make sure. Didn't realize that for the US and many other countries, the AR fee was actually already prepaid. And here's a more normal example. In 1825, returned from China to Wisconsin with the usual seal in the signature place. And if you look at these two together, you'll see front and back. They look a little different because different stages of sulfurization, which is often a problem with these cards. And you can also see they're bilingual, French-English. Now, I mentioned before that in 1925 there were rate changes, and there were also in the domestic section. There were also changes in the international section, namely from being a free option, the AR fee internationally became 5 cents. And there were other changes as well. 15th April 25, well, the domestic return receipt fee became 3 cents, what we saw before. Domestic registration fee rose from 10 cents to 15 cents. The international AR fee became 5 cents, but the international registration fee remained at 10 cents. So we have this weird situation where international registration cost less than domestic registration. It only lasted 4 or 5 months. But this situation actually occurred 20 years later as well in the US. So here's an example that was mailed on the first day of the rate change, April 15th, 1925. And it's correctly rated. So it was 10 cents, the international registration fee, 5 cents, the AR fee, and another 5 cents for the UPU rate. And then there was a hand stamp, probably at the first New York office. It was then sent to the one which arranged for international delivery, where it was properly given the AR hand stamp. This is a well-known New York AR hand stamp, and it shows considerable wear by this time. However, the weird behavior of the rates often caused errors. So we have incorrect rates. Here's an example with actually 2 errors. You can just barely make out this turquoise hand stamp on this August 1925 cover. It says register return receipt wanted in a rectangle. And there's 25 cents postage. So that would have been 10 cents international registration, 5 cents AR, 5 cents UPU, and it's over apparently and 5 cents more. Now that wouldn't be double rate since the second rate was 3 cents. So of course it's open to conjecture, but it might have been that they weren't thinking. They knew the domestic registration fee was 15 cents. And so it was probably the international registration fee. So it's 5 cents overpaid. And here's one that's 5 cents underpaid. This is December 25 to Austria. Now, by this time, the international registration fee had become 15 cents. So it required 15 cents registration fee, 5 cents AR fee, and 5 cents UPU rate, but only 20 cents was applied, and it requested there's a return receipt requested. It's even at 10 cents, which might have been double the deficiency, but I'm not sure. Uh, and in both cases, we also see that though it left via New York, the port of exit was in neither case did they mark it AR. Now, you'd expect to see a lot of service between US and Canada, a lot of AR mail, but there really isn't. And there are some anomalies associated to it. Um, this is a return receipt, an AR form from Dayton again. No, from Dayton again to Vancouver. And it's for a registered letter from Dayton to Vancouver. But in this period, the Treaty of Vienna was supposed to go the other way around. And we see seen five or six others. I've also seen one from Canada, which show this anomaly. They go in the reverse direction. And it's plausible that there was an agreement between Canada and the US to ignore that aspect of the Treaty of Vienna. In fact, exactly this thing is known between Australia and New Zealand in the Treaty of Vienna period, so it's quite plausible. And another feature about service with Canada, you could use RRR cards as domestic cards for mail to Canada under some circumstances. There's some restrictions. So here's a very early example, and you can see this is the domestic card immediately because it's unilingual. It's English only. And this was from someplace in Wisconsin to Ernfold. So there were no major cities in between the places. So it would have crossed at some small point, and they wouldn't have had a chance they probably didn't have any AR forms. And sometimes for other countries, you see domestic cards used. Here's again a domestic card because it's English only. This was used to Netherlands, and this was in 1921. So AR cards were not used up till 1922, really worldwide. So the clerk in the Netherlands decided this was a postcard, so it required postcard uh, fee, and that's what he put, 12.5 cents on it. It's not necessary because cards travel free. These AR cards travel freely freely in the mails. The AR fee was actually different. That's how we how we suspect that they put the postcard rate on it, which was 12.5 cents. And this wasn't even authorized. I mean, this was from Chicago, which you'd expect to have had the proper forms. And then there were extra services like ones I mentioned before. After the fact was available on international mail, after the fact AR, but I haven't seen one from the US. Replacement arose if the form arrived damaged or missing, that is the registered letter normally with the form attached, and the form was missing, then replacement had to be made up in the country of destination, and there was no extra charge for that. So this is an example. 1903, in this period, the form was sent with the registered cover, and this was for a letter from Philadelphia to Santiago, Chile. And it was mailed in March from Philadelphia. It arrived, or it was delivered 17th of April. And that's when the form was prepared for it. So that's not an after the fact because that would have required that would have been from the country of origin. This was replacement because they couldn't find the US AR form or they couldn't use it. It's also duplicate. if you sent out, this is sort of the dual of replacement. If you sent out a registered letter with AR and the card didn't return after a while, which was decided by the post office what a while means, you could request a duplicate AR card form at no charge. So, and it even says so here, duplicate advice of delivery, that's the type. And this was probably philatelic mail addressed to the postmaster in Tahiti. But we don't know exactly when the card was sent. We know that the registered letter was mailed on 17th of December, and that it arrived on the and was delivered on the 29th of December. No, yeah, that's reasonable. It's 12 days. This was presumably signed 16th of March, 3 months later, more than 3 months later. We don't know when the card was actually prepared, but it would have been well after the date of sending. You could also do this you could also have AR insured parcels, but this is really hard to find, simply because international insured parcels are hard to find, at least between the wars. Here is one example. This is during the war. Well, it depends, during or before, depending on where you're from. This is an insured, it says insured. It was an insured parcel mailed from West Virginia to Chile, and it was signed. They use the same card, of course, the same AR card for this. You could also return by air from the 1930s, but these are really hard to find. You put the amount of the airmail fee to the place, except or you paid the airmail fee to the place, an additional airmail charge on the registered letter, which also had to be sent by air. And the rule said, unlike the domestic case where the stamps paying the airmail fee were put on the card, rule said you put it on the cover. And so this is a violation of the rules. And it's also a violation because the airmail rate to China was 25 cents, and they only put 20 cents. And I'm not even sure I don't think it even went by air anyway, just from the dates. Well, I'm not entirely sure. But this was 1949 to Shanghai, and there was a revolution going on. Well, it's a little after the revolution, but anyway, things were in disorder. So that might have delayed it too. And then we have incoming AR, and you might wonder why a cover would be endorsed escaped until you look at the address, which was Fort Leavenworth. And then you understand this was a prisoner at Fort Leavenworth who had escaped. And this is from Germany in 1883. The messy thing at the top says Einschreiben gegen Rückschein. This is the usual term for registration with AR in German. And there's also a line in German and a line in semi-English, which, if you look at the English only, you'd understand that it probably is a request for personal delivery, for restricted delivery. And this is 1883. And so that even predates the deliver personally cover we had. But whether it was a moot point anyway, because the guy had escaped. It was even written twice on it. And you can also see that for Germany, the AR fee was actually paid on the form, and not the cover, because just from the postage here. This was from a tribunal in Bruxelles. Another unusual thing is, here we have this weird New York AR. It was applied. They almost never applied the AR hand stamp in the destination country. That is, coming from some other. Here they did. This was from Britain to Portland, Oregon, in 1914. The British clerk tried to imitate the contemporary AR hand stamp, which was an AR novel, and he did a not bad job. In UK, not every office had an AR hand stamp. Well, uh, because in UK, uh, AR was very unpopular, and it's actually quite difficult to find AR material from UK in the 19th century, well, or early 20th century as well. Now, here's one likely missing a German AR card. So you can see there's a hand stamp, notice the postmaster, blah, 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 return receipt required. The German sender has put in the standard formula. Probably there was a card attached, but maybe it came off, and the clerk on entry saw the request here, understood it, and put this hand stamp on it. It's the only example I've ever seen of this phenomenon. Okay. And finally, I think this is finally, uh, return restricted delivery on incoming mail. So from some countries, there are requests for restricted delivery. From Hungary, I've seen a few examples, and from Canada, quite a few examples, but I didn't think they would have been honored. However, this thing, with its standard, well, delivered addressee, this was written by the clerk in Hungary, and I have seen a number of examples because they misspelled addressee. And the first line is a request for um, personal restricted delivery, and then there's this U.S. hand stamp, delivered addressee only. So this request was honored, even though in the U.S. at the time the restricted delivery required an additional 10 cents. So they just ignored that. And that's it. This was just the tip of the iceberg. It's enormously complicated, and there are all sorts of other features that I couldn't have gone into in a talk. Um, you can see a couple of exhibits of mine, and also a book on worldwide AR that you can download from Richard Fraggiolo's website. This stuff, especially for the US, is very readily available. There's all sorts of tons of stuff on eBay and in dealer stocks. So it's an area that's wide open to everyone. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was extremely, extremely interesting. And I feel like we all learned a great deal about something about which we didn't know a great deal. So thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions for David?
Yes. Um, that was a wonderful talk, as Greg said. My question pertains to the personal receipt required. It would seem to me that probably the most common situation is that for legal reasons, somebody wants proof of delivery to the actual individual and not to his or her
Yes.
agent.
Yeah.
And from the point of view of the recipient, they don't want to get tangled up in a legal matter, because this could be used as evidence against them, and they
Yeah.
lose their plausible deniability that they
Yeah.
didn't know anything
Yeah.
about it.
That's undoubtedly, yeah. Now that you mention it, that's undoubtedly the reason they didn't want to. I simply assumed they couldn't be bothered, but that's actually a really good reason for refusing it, because I've seen numerous legal many you see from all over the world. You see many AR cards and forms have been notarized, and they refer to cases, so and they're used as evidence.
Right. Yeah, I actually had the same experience in business that if I wrote a letter of concern to senior management about a sensitive issue by email, they would never acknowledge receipt. And so it gave them the ability to claim they didn't know about it. So even within the company, it would happen. Um, The other thought I had was regarding requiring that the AR forms be filled out at the country of destination. And it struck me that that would make sense because if I mail a letter from Connecticut to Poland or Latvia or something, the postal clerk here has no access to the language which they require. So if it can be marked as AR, which is internationally understood, then when it gets to the destination, whatever unlikely country it's going to, the people in that country will have the proper form in their
Well, yeah,
language.
that was the reason for requiring the use of French, because it was assumed I mean, French was the official language of the UPU. So if you send a letter with the markings in French, or sent with a form, it was in French. So in principle, someone in the post office should have been able to read it. And in fact, that may have been the reason you mentioned may have been the one that uh, they switched in the Treaty of Vienna period. But then it seemed rather awkward. And so I don't know the reason that they switched back, but my impression is that it was very awkward
Right,
to
right.
deal
Yeah.
with.
And the French would, as you said, in principle be a solution because everybody agreed to it and there's a limited vocabulary
Yeah,
involved.
yeah. And they don't have to know much. I mean, and if they were a clerk and they would, after some experience, they would know what the French means anyway. I mean, just for their purposes.
Right. Well, you've got an amazing collection.
No
Thank you.
kidding. Anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? All right. Well, as we used to say after a good university lecture, everybody's sitting here in stunned disbelief, unable to even conceive, unable to conceive of a
Yeah, it was a
question.
stunning talk.
Well, I think it was. I think it was. I'm gonna take over the screen now, and I'm going to just remind everyone after thanking David again for a really stunning talk, and thank you for sharing this with us. Very grateful to you, and I know we all learned a lot. So I just wanted to let everybody know that on July 14th, which is Bastille Day, and our talk has nothing to do with Bastille Day at all. Michel Hood, who is a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada and one of the world's great experts on Bangkok B auxiliary markings on stamps. He won't be talking to us about that, but he's going to be talking to us about purser markings on straight settlement stamps and documents. And Michelle has written the book on the topic. And I know that you'll really enjoy learning about this slightly less well-known and well-researched area. So in any event, I thank you all for being here with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you in July, and enjoy the rest of your month. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.